the fear of the unknown. What unsettles us most is not what we see, but what we cannot. Horror draws its strength from silence, shadows, and uncertainty, where the mind fills in blanks with things far worse than reality. A dark hallway is frightening not because of what's there, but because of what might be waiting. This concept thrives on ambiguity, the refusal to give the audience answers, forcing them to wrestle with their own imagination. Filmmakers and writers understand that the unseen is always more powerful. In the mist, the true terror isn't the monsters themselves, but the shapes hidden within the fog. Lovecraft built entire worlds around this idea, describing horrors as indescribable because our brains recoil from what we cannot categorize. Alien held its creature in shadows for much of the film, letting paranoia fester until even silence felt like a threat. And the Blair Witch Project became infamous for showing nothing concrete, just fear, screams, and implication, because the audience was left to invent their own monster. The unknown strips away safety. Rules no longer apply. You can't fight what you can't define, can't prepare for what has no shape. This is why the dark remains humanity's oldest fear. It whispers possibilities, each one worse than the last until your pulse races over nothing but shadows. In horror, the unknown doesn't stay empty. It waits watching, reminding you that sometimes the greatest terror is not in the reveal, but in the silence before it. Body horror. Few horrors cut as deeply as the betrayal of your own flesh. Body horror thrives on the corruption, mutation, and violation of the human form, taking what is familiar and twisting it into something unrecognizable. It unsettles us because it confronts the illusion of control we think we have over our bodies. Skin tears, bones bend, organs rebel, and suddenly the boundary between human and inhuman dissolves. Directors like David Cronenberg perfected this subgenre, turning the human body into a canvas of grotesque transformation. In The Fly, a man's slow metamorphosis into an insect isn't just revolting, it's tragic, reminding us that disease and decay are monsters we all carry within. John Carpenter's The Thing amplified this terror with shape-shifting creatures that imitated people down to the smallest detail, only to erupt into writhing limbs and screaming mouths. Even anime masters like Junji Ito have explored this, drawing impossibly distorted human shapes that linger in memory long after the page is closed. The fear works because the body is supposed to be our home, our constant. When horror infects it, we are left with the nightmare that there is no safe refuge, not even inside ourselves. It reminds us of infection, of cancer, of aging, of every way our own cells can turn against us. Body horror blurs identity. Where does the human end and the abomination begin? By forcing us to stare at flesh undone, this subgenre whispers a truth more disturbing than any ghost or demon, that the greatest monster we might face is already inside us, waiting to surface. Psychological breakdown. Horror doesn't always need claws or fangs. Sometimes the scariest collapse happens entirely inside the mind. Psychological breakdowns strip away stability until reality itself begins to unravel. Madness, paranoia, and obsession become the monsters. Silent and invisible, but relentless. What makes this horror so haunting is its intimacy. It doesn't stalk you from the outside, it grows within, whispering doubts until even your reflection can't be trusted. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining embodies this descent. Jack Torrance isn't possessed by a creature, he's eroded by isolation, resentment, and the slow bleed of sanity. The Overlook Hotel becomes less a haunted space than a mirror of his madness. Similarly, Black Swan shows the psychological toll of perfectionism. Nina's pursuit of flawlessness fractures her identity, making hallucinations and reality indistinguishable until she destroys herself in the name of art. Perfect Blue, the anime masterpiece, pushes this even further, trapping its protagonist in a maze of obsession and blurred realities, where identity itself collapses. These stories terrify because they force us to question our own stability. Who hasn't felt paranoia, anxiety, or the fear of losing control? Psychological horror exaggerates these cracks until they split wide open. Unlike a monster you can run from, madness follows you everywhere. It wears your skin, speaks in your voice, thinks with your mind. The breakdown is horrifying not because it's foreign, but because it's possible. And once reason shatters, there is no return. The true terror isn't being killed by something outside, it's being consumed by the storm inside your own head. The doppelganger. Few horrors disturb us like the sight of ourselves staring back. The doppelganger is not just a double, it is an echo twisted wrong, a mirror that reflects something we don't want to see. Across folklore, literature, and cinema, the double is a harbinger of doom, often signaling death, madness, or the collapse of identity itself. The terror lies in the idea that the enemy is not some distant monster, but a version of you that already exists. Jordan Peele's Us modernized this concept with chilling precision, presenting tethered doubles who rise from underground to claim the lives of their surface counterparts. The horror wasn't only in their brutality, but in the realization that they were us, our shadows, our discarded selves made flesh. Dostoevsky explored this fear in The Double, where a man's life unravels after encountering a version of himself that seems intent on replacing him. Even in classic Gothic tales like Edgar Allan Poe's William Wilson, the double acts as both tormentor and conscience, reflecting the parts of ourselves we cannot suppress. The doppelganger unsettles because it destabilizes the foundation of identity. If there is another you, perfectly identical yet alien, what makes you unique? Who is the original and who is the copy? Worse, what if the copy is stronger, smarter, or more ruthless? Horror thrives in these questions because they leave no escape. You cannot outrun yourself. You cannot hide from your own face. The Double reminds us of the possibility that our greatest fear isn't the stranger in the dark. It's the reflection staring back, smiling when we don't. Possession and loss of control. Few fears are as primal as losing control of your own body, your own voice, your own will. Possession horror preys on the nightmare of autonomy ripped away, when something foreign forces itself inside and begins to steer. The terror isn't just the violence that follows. It's the helplessness, the erasure of self, the dreadful awareness that you are still inside, trapped, screaming silently while something else wears your skin. The Exorcist remains the landmark of this fear, turning a young girl's body into a battlefield between innocence and demonic corruption. The horror lies not only in the grotesque transformations, but in the helplessness of those around her, powerless to protect or reason with what has taken hold. Jordan Peele's Get Out modernizes possession through science, with the sunken place showing a consciousness locked deep inside its own body, watching through distant eyes as someone else moves the limbs. Even more unsettling is Upgrade, where technology hijacks a man's nervous system, turning him into a passenger within his own flesh, his protests drowned out by the machine's calm efficiency. Possession is horrifying because it attacks the very concept of selfhood. We define our lives through choice, through agency. When that is stripped away, what remains? Are you still you if you cannot act, cannot resist, cannot speak? Worse still, possession stories suggest that what replaces you may not even be entirely alien. It might be a darker part of yourself, unlocked and set loose. Horror thrives in this collapse of boundaries, reminding us of the most terrifying truth of all. Sometimes the monster doesn't break in. Sometimes it's already inside. Eternal punishment. Death is frightening, but at least it offers an end. What horror strips away in the idea of eternal punishment is the possibility of release. These stories imagine a fate worse than death, trapped forever in suffering, cycles of torment that repeat without mercy, existence stretched beyond endurance until time itself becomes a weapon. It is not pain alone that terrifies, but the absence of escape. Clive Barker's Hellraiser embodied this perfectly. The Cenobites don't just kill their victims. They take them to dimensions of infinite torment, where pleasure and agony blur until the soul itself erodes. In Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, humanity's last survivors are kept alive by a malevolent AI, mutilated and tortured endlessly with no hope of death. Even mainstream horror toys with this dread. The cursed videotape in The Ring condemns victims to an unavoidable countdown, while Silent Hill traps characters in cycles of guilt and punishment that never truly end. This concept resonates because it mirrors real fears: addiction, regret, trauma, things that trap people in loops they cannot break. Eternal punishment is horror's way of taking that human experience and magnifying it to cosmic proportions. What if your worst mistake, your deepest fear, became the only reality you ever knew, repeated forever? Unlike a slasher's knife or a monster's claws, eternal punishment doesn't kill you, it refuses to. That's the horror: suffering without conclusion, punishment without forgiveness, time without end. It suggests that death is not the end, but a door, and on the other side, something far worse is waiting: the uncanny valley. Humans are wired to recognize faces, to trust the familiar. That's why the uncanny valley unsettles us so deeply. It's when something looks almost human, but not quite. The smile lingers too long, the eyes don't blink right, the movements feel slightly mechanical. Our instincts scream that something is wrong, even when logic insists everything should be fine. This unease comes from being caught between recognition and rejection, the comfort of the human form, corrupted by imperfection. Horror has mined this space for decades. Child's Play gave us a doll whose synthetic grin hid murderous intent. More recently, M3GAN fused robotics and personality into a plaything that looks just real enough to disturb. Japanese horror has long explored this theme through lifelike mannequins and dolls, such as in Ghost Theater and Marabito, where the human-like becomes a vessel for spirits or obsession. Even Ex Machina blurred the line, asking whether an android that moves and thinks like us could truly be trusted, or whether its lack of soul makes it more dangerous. The Uncanny Valley works because it undermines trust. You look into what seems like a human face, but something in your subconscious knows it isn't real. It forces you to question your own instincts. If you can't even trust your senses to tell human from imitation, what else could deceive you? Horror thrives here because it whispers an ancient fear, that predators wear familiar skins, that danger hides behind a smile. The uncanny doesn't scream, it smiles, blinks almost correctly and waits for you to step closer, until you realize too late that what you thought was human never was. Cosmic indifference. H.P. Lovecraft perfected this vision. His creatures, Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, Azathoth, aren't villains with motives. They are incomprehensible entities whose very existence drives humans mad. In the Call of Cthulhu, the monster sleeps beneath the ocean. Dreaming indifferently, it's awakening enough to shatter civilization without even noticing us. Films like Event Horizon and The Mist channel the same dread. Not just creatures, but entire realities that dwarf our ability to understand. Even modern works like The Color Out of Space show alien presences that warp and mutate life simply by existing, not by intent. What makes cosmic indifference terrifying is its rejection of comfort. We want to believe we matter, that suffering has meaning, that death is part of a story. Cosmic horror strips that away. It whispers that the universe has no script, no answers, no mercy. The stars above are not guardians. They are watchers, or worse, nothing at all. In this worldview, survival isn't triumph, it's postponement. And the greatest fear is not that we'll be destroyed, but that we'll realize we were never important enough to be noticed in the first place.
Subscribe for more interesting stuff. Tell us your experience in the comments.